All right, welcome to the deep dive. We're diving into something pretty interesting today, an academic paper, actually.
Oh, sounds riveting.
And it is actually. It's called Inviting Students into the Pursuit of Meaning. It was published back in 2001 by Isabel Elbeck and Margaret G. McKeown.
Okay. And what sparked this deep dive?
Well, we got a lot of requests from you listeners about how to, really understand what you're reading, and not just skimming the surface, but, getting those deeper ideas.
Yeah, I get that. It's easy to get lost in the words and miss the point.
Exactly. So we're going to unpack this whole questioning the author approach. They call it QTA,
Hmm.
how it works, what kind of impact it has. And we'll even look at, what makes it so hard to actually make this kind of approach work in every classroom.
Sounds like a pretty comprehensive plan. I think this will be really insightful for everyone listening. Beck and McKeown didn't just point out a problem. They actually tried to find a solution.
Right, a practical approach. So let's rewind back to the 80s. The paper mentions some studies from that era that really got these authors thinking about how students read. What were they seeing back then?
Well, they were seeing a lot of surface-level reading. Students could remember facts, but they weren't really, like, grappling with the big ideas or connecting the dots, so to speak.
And they give that example, which I think is so telling, of the student who remembers the Boston Tea Party as, something about rotten tea, but totally missed the whole point about taxation.
Yeah, that's a classic example. It's like remembering the color of the car, but not that it was speeding away from a bank robbery, right?
Exactly. Like the detail is there, but the meaning, the significance, it's just gone. And they say this wasn't just a one-off. Other researchers were finding similar things.
Right, so there was this growing awareness that something wasn't clicking for students when they were reading.
So naturally, they took a look at the textbooks themselves. What did they find there?
Well, they found that the textbooks were often part of the problem. They presented information in a way that didn't really help students make those deeper connections.
Like just a bunch of facts, no real flow or explanation.
Exactly. They called it a lack of coherence. And to test this out, they actually rewrote some passages, to make them more coherent.
Like that Boston Tea Party example. Can you remind us of the original and the revised versions?
Sure. So the original said something like, boatloads of tea were sent to America. Since it was cheaper than ever, the British thought that surely the colonists would buy tea now. They were wrong. Tea was burned. Tea was left to rot. You see, it just lays out the events without explaining the why.
Right, no context.
And the revised version, they added that crucial why. It said, since it was now cheaper than ever, the British thought that surely the colonists would buy tea. So they sent boatloads of it to the colonies. But because the tea still had the tax on it, the colonists were as angry as ever. To show their anger, the colonists burned some of the tea. They left some to rot.
So they explicitly linked the colonists' anger to the tax.
Exactly. And they found that these revisions did help. Students understood the text better, but it wasn't a total solution.
Interesting. So then they started exploring this concept of voice in the text. What did they mean by that?
Well, they were thinking about what makes spoken conversations engaging, right?
Hmm.
And they identified three elements: activity, orality, and connectivity.
Okay, break those down for us.
Sure. So activity means using more dynamic language, verbs, making the events come alive.
Mm.
Orality is about making it sound more conversational, like someone's actually talking to you. And connectivity is about establishing a direct link between the reader and the text.
So it's about making the text less, textbooky.
Exactly. So, for example, instead of saying the British lawmaking body was and is called Parliament, they changed it to the British called their lawmaking body Parliament. More active, you see.
I see.
And for orality, they took a phrase like, Britain started passing laws to tax the colonies, and they came up with some new laws to tax the colonies.
Okay, definitely sounds more casual.
And for connectivity, they took this sentence, Britain thought the colonists should pay their share, and rephrased it as, it's only fair to ask the colonists to pay their share of the cost of the French and Indian War, they said. Like, they're speaking directly to the reader.
So they're personalizing it.
Precisely. And these changes, combined with coherence, did lead to even better comprehension. But there was still this missing piece.
Which brings us to the heart of it all, the questioning the author, or QTA, approach. So what's the big idea here?
Well, they realized that even with a well-written text, students weren't always actively engaging with the ideas. So they shifted the focus from the text itself to how students interact with it.
So it's not just about reading, it's about how you read.
Right. And the core idea of QTA is to encourage students to view reading as a dialogue with the author, a dialogue where the author isn't always perfect.
So it's like challenging the author, even.
In a way, yes. It's about encouraging students to think critically and not just accept everything they read as absolute truth.
I like that. So how does this QTA approach work in practice?
It has four key features. First is this idea of the text being the product of a fallible author, someone who might make mistakes or not be completely clear. This helps students see that if they don't understand something, it might not be their fault.
It takes the pressure off of them.
Exactly. Then there are the general teacher-posed queries. These are open-ended questions designed to guide students towards the main ideas. Things like, what is the author trying to say here? Or, what does the author want you to know at this point?
So not just basic fact-checking, but really digging into the author's intention.
Right. And then we have the follow-up queries, which are crucial. They're used to push students thinking even further, depending on their initial responses.
So how do those work?
Well, if a student just repeats what the text says, the teacher might ask, okay, but what does the author mean by that? Or, if a student gives an incomplete answer, the teacher might say, is that all the author wanted us to understand? And to help them connect ideas, the teacher might ask, why do you think the author is telling us this right now? Or, how does this connect to what we talked about before?
So it's about guiding them towards a deeper understanding, not just making sure they read the words.
Exactly. And the fourth key feature is what they call the online context.
Sure.
This simply means that QTA happens during the initial reading, not afterwards. So the teacher stops at certain points to pose these questions and facilitate discussion.
Ah, so it's an ongoing process.
Right. It emphasizes that understanding happens as you're reading, not just at the end.
Okay, so they took this approach into classrooms, and they saw some pretty remarkable results. What were some of the key changes they observed?
The biggest change was in the classroom discussions. They became much more focused on meaning and making connections. Teachers were asking more why and how questions, and they were building on students' responses to guide the discussion further.
So the teachers were facilitating, not just lecturing.
Exactly. And the students, they became much more active participants. They were talking more, asking more questions, and their answers were more thoughtful and insightful. They were really trying to make sense of the text and connect it to what they already knew.
That's amazing. They even have that example of a fifth-grade class discussing the French and Indian War. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. So they're reading about how the war started because the British colonists were moving onto land claimed by the French. One student, Lindsay, correctly points out that they were fighting over land. But the teacher, Mrs. W., doesn't stop there. She asks, well, why is land so important? Has the author told us why it matters?
So she's pushing them to think deeper.
Exactly. And Lindsay adds that they wanted to settle on the land, to which Mrs. W. agrees. Then another student, Olivia, gives a kind of vague answer, and Mrs. W. rephrases it, saying, so we see a conflict arising here over land, to clarify for everyone.
She's guiding the discussion, but not giving them the answer.
Right. Then she asks another student, Brittany, to build on what Olivia said. Brittany mentions that they couldn't just buy land back then, they had to fight for it. And Mrs. W. jumps on that asking, what do you mean you had to fight for it?
So she's encouraging them to elaborate, to explain their thinking.
Exactly. And through these questions, she helps them understand not just that they were fighting over land, but why land was so important at that time.
And they have that other example, too, of the class that had been using QTA for a while, the one about the Pilgrims.
Oh, yeah, that one was fascinating. They were discussing a passage about how the Pilgrims wanted to worship God in their own way. And what's so interesting is that the students basically took over the discussion. They were debating with each other, trying to figure out what that phrase really meant, with very little input from the teacher.
So they were internalizing that questioning process, applying it on their own.
Exactly. They were becoming active thinkers, not just passive receivers of information.
The authors also looked at how QTA affected students' overall views of reading. What did they find?
Well, they found that students who experienced QTA were much more likely to describe reading in terms of process, of actively engaging with the text to make meaning. They said things like, we come to our own conclusions, or we try to figure it out. While students who hadn't used QTA focused more on just the format or activities involved in reading.
So they saw reading as more than just decoding words on a page.
Right, it became an intellectual activity for them. And when asked about the purpose of reading, the QTA students were much more likely to say it was to understand, while other students said it was to learn, in a more general sense, or to be evaluated.
So their whole understanding of reading shifted.
Exactly. And they use this great analogy of a maze to describe QTA discussions. The text is like a maze, and understanding is like reaching the center. In a traditional classroom, the teacher might lead students through the maze on a set path. But with QTA, the teacher's more like an assistant, helping students develop their own strategies for navigating the maze and finding their own way to the center.
That's a great way to put it. So QTA is this powerful tool for encouraging deep reading, but the authors also point out that it's not without its challenges.
Right. One of the biggest challenges is that it's really hard to do well. Teachers have to be so attuned to the content, to their students' understanding, and they have to be incredibly skilled at guiding those discussions. It's much more demanding than just asking simple questions.
So it requires a high level of skill and awareness from the teacher.
Absolutely. And they also talk about the challenge of sustaining educational innovations. A lot of times teachers get excited about new ideas, but they don't get the ongoing support they need to really make them work.
So it's not just about introducing a new approach, it's about providing the right kind of support.
Exactly. And they found that a combination of workshops, follow-up coaching, resources, and peer support was really crucial for helping teachers effectively implement QTA. And they also emphasized the importance of school-wide commitment, having principals and administrators on board, creating a culture of collaboration, and providing the logistical support that teachers need.
So it takes a village.
It really does.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, what would you say is the core takeaway for our listeners?
I think the key takeaway is this. Reading for understanding is an active process, not a passive one. It's about engaging with the text, questioning the author, and really thinking critically about the ideas being presented. And the QTA approach gives teachers a way to help students do that, to become active, engaged readers who are truly in pursuit of meaning.
And it makes you think, doesn't it? This whole idea of questioning the author, of not just accepting everything you read at face value, it's relevant for all of us, not just students. Think about how you approach information in your own life, the news you read, the articles you share, even the things we talk about on this very show. What assumptions are you making? What deeper understanding could you gain by taking a more active questioning approach? Something to ponder, for sure. Thanks for joining us on this Deep Dive.